Good morning, everyone. Please take your seat now and yeah, a little bit too short for the mics. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our next keynote today, Professor Camilla Knight. Professor Knight completed her bachelor and master's degrees at Loughborough University before earning her PhD at the University of Alberta in 2012. Her doctoral thesis was entitled Enhancing Parental Involvement in Junior Tennis, which is reflective of her broad research interest in understanding and enhancing the psycho-social experiences of children in sport. Within this area of interest, she holds a particular focus on the influence of parents on youth sport. Professor Knight is currently engaged in several research projects, both on the theme of parenting and youth sport and other related areas of interest. During the past decade, her research has benefited from fundings from bodies including the European Commission and the International Olympic Committee. She is the co-author of Parenting in Youth Sport from Research to Practice book, and also the co-editor of Sport Psychology for Young Athletes. She has also published widely on topics such as parents' experiences in sport, parental involvement in sport, youth sport participation, and parent-coach relations. Since 2013, Professor Knight has taught at Swansea University, where she is a faculty member in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Here she teaches at both undergraduate and postgraduate level, and she supervises several PhD students. In addition, she is also the lead of Welsh Research Advisory and Evaluation Group for the Child Protection and Sport Unit. She is a member of the Welsh Safeguarding and Sport Strategy Group and the Youth Sport Lead for the Welsh Institute of Performance Sciences. In addition to her research and consultancy work, Professor Knight is also a BASIS accredited sport and exercise scientist with a focus on psychology, and she enjoys working with youth athletes, with parents and coaches to help enhancing their experiences and performance within youth sport, and also to enhance young athletes' psychological development. So, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our next keynote, Professor Camilla Knight.
Thank you, Anastasia. I will get you to do all my job interviews for me going forward. Not that I'm leaving Swansea before anyone says that. Are we good? Okay. So it's a real pleasure to be here today to talk about parents in youth sport, something that really is my passion, and hopefully I can take you on that journey with me today. But before we start, I do just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to FEPSAC and the committee for inviting me. It's a real honor to be invited and to be at such an excellent conference. I would like to say thank you to all of those who are researching in this area. If everyone could just chill out a little bit, though, and slow it down, because I can't keep up, that would be much appreciated. But it's really a privilege to work in a space with so many excellent scholars who are pushing this field forward. And finally, a thank you to you all for coming today. I know we're getting into the later stages of the conference, and there's been a lot of late nights, so I really appreciate you making the efforts to come. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, my hope today is to take you on my journey through the sports psychology literature that relates to parents. But critically, I want to consider, where have we been, and more importantly, where do I think we need to go? My hope is that this is a nice, smooth journey with imagine you're in a blue and a green space. This is where I live. I have a fear the journey may go a little bit like this, but if we start in the same place and finish in the same place, then I'll be happy. What I'm not going to do is review all of the literature in this area. For anyone who knows the sport parenting literature at all, it is growing massively at the moment. There's been hundreds of papers come out in the last decade, and part of those have been review papers. So if you came here hoping for me to review decades worth of research, feel free to head out or just take a look at some of these papers. Instead, what I want to do is, I guess, take you on a thought exercise. I want to take you on my thinking about this literature. But before we do that, I just want to try and explain to you how I got where I am and why that's important. Now, in qualitative research, for those of you who know my work, you know I'm a qualitative researcher, we talk about positionality and we talk about explaining, our background, but we usually say something like, I played tennis for 13 years, I've done X number of qualitative studies, we're good to go. But when we think about research and we think about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve, it's much more than that. So just give me a moment of indulgence while I take you on my journey to explain where I've got to. So in my family, you played sport. I'm the youngest of three. It wasn't a conversation, it was not a negotiation, it wasn't a pressure, you just played sport. My dad was a PE teacher, and we were really fortunate to engage in all sorts of different activities. At some point, around the age of 13, fully aligned with the developmental model of sport participation, I decided to specialize in tennis. Chris, no comments, I told you it was a horrendous tennis photo. I decided to specialize in tennis, and that became my big focus. I traveled all around the UK. It aligned with my parents splitting up, so I lived with my mum, I traveled with my dad. It worked really, really well. But as any of you know who've been involved in sport at any level, there were highs and lows. I vividly remember going on a 25-match winning streak. Then it was followed promptly with a 21-match losing streak. And I remember going, I don't know what to do. Should I quit? Should I carry on? What should I do? How am I going to cope with this situation? And why do I share that? Well, I share that because it made me a horrendous child to parent. When things were good, things were great. When things were bad in tennis, things were horrendous at home, and I was upset and disappointed, and all of these things we see with young athletes. So my poor parents had to put up with that. If anyone ever sees my mum, don't tell her I did this photo because her hair looks horrendous and she'll kill me. It's hard to find a photo of your separated parents together, so this is me with my parents. My mum has never seen me play tennis. It was too stressful for her. She couldn't put up with the challenges, she couldn't put up with my disappointment, she couldn't do anything. So she stayed home, and she will tell anyone that the best invention was the mobile phone, because she knew if I text her, I lost. If I phoned her, I won. So she just waited. Is it going to be a phone call or text? And then I know how to respond. My dad grew up playing sport. He would sit on the sideline and show nothing. He would read a newspaper through every single match, and he knew exactly what had happened, and he was perfect in terms of just being a very calming influence. But I didn't think much of it. Tennis was what I did. My parents put up with it, and we just got along. But at some point during my undergraduate degree, I had some conversations with my mum. I had a period of reflection, and I thought, this has been pretty rough on my family. This journey that I've been has impacted on them. And so I said to my mum, and had some conversations with Chris Harwood, who was my undergrad supervisor. I said, I think I want to study parents. And my mum said, and I've said this before, and I record the conversation, she said, whatever you do, don't just start telling parents all of the things that they're doing wrong. It's hard enough being a parent as it is. And as a parent now, I fully understand what she was saying. And that conversation, amongst other conversations, has shaped everything that I've wanted to do in this field. And so I have come into this area unashamedly biased towards parents. I recognize the challenges they put up with when I was playing. I always have my mum's voice singing in my head around, not making it harder for parents. So through my research, I have wanted to understand how can we make it easier for parents and also easier for children. And so consequently, a big part of the work I've done has also been trying to translate my research into practice. So why have I shared that? Why is that important for this talk? Well, ultimately, as I implied, this background, this experience of mine has underpinned what I want to do with my work. Now, I know many of you are not sport parenting researchers, so I appreciate that topic, the content might not be spot on, but all of you will have a reason for doing the research you do. And so my first, I guess, thought challenge is, do you know why you do the research you do? For me, I do. I do it because I want to make the sporting experiences of young athletes and parents better. And that's important because it shapes the research questions I ask. It shapes what I read in research papers. It shapes what I remember from research papers, shapes how I interact with work. It influences what I see as the purpose of my work, and importantly for this conference, aligned with the theme of challenges and opportunities, it highlights to me what I think is a challenge and an opportunity within our field. And what is that? Well, the challenge and the opportunity that I see is to consider, are we really, as a profession, as sports parenting researchers, are we really improving the youth sport experiences of children and their parents? If you work in a different field, I'd pose the same question. Are you really, through your research, improving that field? And that's the challenge that I want to talk about through this presentation. Now, if you think we are, and I'm happy for people to have different views on where I conclude, then my question is, if we are improving the experiences, can we do it better? Can we do it more effectively, and can we do it more efficiently? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, when I first came into the field, there was some research on sport parenting, but not a lot. And a lot of it had come from different areas. So originally, the research had focused, when I first was around, the research I was interested in was understanding why children dropped out of sport, why they stayed in sport, and parents started to get mentioned in those situations. We also had some early research that started to distinguish and differentiate between supportive parenting and pressuring parenting. And at the same time, we had research that was talking around talent. And both within and outside of the sporting fields, it was apparent that parents were really important in influencing children's development of talent. So if we go back to my question, how was this research helping? Well, first, I think this research was helping us to recognize that parents were important. So it gave us a stimulus to start to study this area. So I think that's important in pushing this area forward. Obviously, it also drew attention to the interactions and the relationship between parents and outcomes for children. So we could start to say, well, if we want to improve the experience of children or help them to become more talented, then we need to think about parents. But I have a big issue, and I've had this issue throughout my career. We also had very dichotomous thinking. We had an idea that there was supportive parenting and pressuring parenting, and that these two things were distinct. But we also had other research happening. So on the one hand, we've got all of this work talking about the importance of the family. Talking about the importance of parents within the development of talent. But then we also had papers suggesting that kids would be better off without parents. I appreciate that this is a flippant comment from a coach, but that comment is a comment that I have heard over and over and over again all the way through my career. And the suggestion that anyone would be better as an orphan is concerning to me, but the suggestion that within sport we should get rid of parents is also concerning for me. Because what we've set up here is a disconnect between how important parents are and whether they should be present. It's the pressure versus support debate that I think has plagued this field for a long time. So if we were to come back to that question of asking, as researchers, are we improving the experiences of young people and parents? I would say when I first started, not at all. Because if we are suggesting that parents shouldn't be there, that's not going to improve experiences. Fortunately, over the last few decades, the field has progressed quite considerably. And how have we progressed? Well, we've spent some time thinking about parents at competitions. We've talked about what are parents doing on the sidelines? Why are parents doing those things on the sidelines? And we've spent a lot of time considering how parents' engagement and interactions on the sidelines might impact their children. We've also talked to coaches and tried to understand more about what coaches think is important from parents, or where coaches think that parents are or aren't going correctly. And we have spent a lot of time, and by a lot I mean hundreds of papers, looking more and more at the impact of pressure and support and children's perceptions of their parents. So this work built quite considerably on the work that we had done before. We also started to progress into understanding parents' experiences. So what's it like as a parent? Why are parents engaged in the way they are? Do they enjoy just being a taxi driver? We started to consider the different relationships between parents and children and how that might have an impact. And we also started to think very slightly about the environment and how the youth sport environment might be impacting on young athletes. So we went from some quite simple but very important studies that highlighted the importance of parents to quite a substantial growth in areas that we were considering. But what did this research tell us? If I was going to crudely summarize it, it told us, one, parents are important. Okay, so we know that parents are important. We've got a very clear idea that parents have an impact within the youth sport experience. We know that coaches often have negative perceptions of parents, and we know that parents display negative behaviors at youth sport. Okay, so quite simple messages. They haven't developed all that far. Fortunately, with the addition of some additional areas, we started to recognize a little bit more of the nuance. We started to realize that the relationship quality, the individuals' perceptions, that the situations they found themselves in can influence what individuals want from their parents and from others. We also started to really appreciate that this isn't just about the child. We started to appreciate that it is about the parents and that it can be challenging for parents. And it was suggested that if parents are having challenging experiences, then it's going to impact on their children. And as I mentioned, as we started to study the environment a little bit, of course, we found out that the environment can have an impact. But they're quite simple messages and slightly oversimplifying the field. There's still an issue for me. And the issue was, we're starting in the research to see some impact of, understand some of the complexity that is present in this field. But what was happening in practice, and what is still happening in a lot of places, is parents are being told to shut up, stay silent, not interfere with coaches, get red carded on the sidelines, get told that if they're inappropriately behaving, they'll be banned from competitions, and they're told to not even talk to their children about what's going on. So if we reflect on the question, is our research at this time really having an impact that's positive on children and parents' sporting experiences? My conclusion is no, because we've got a lot of research that's saying it's complex and there's a lot of things to consider, and what's happening in practice is we're just telling parents to be quiet. We're pushing them away, we're silencing them, and I think that still happens in a lot of the different countries. Some of you will be sitting there going, well, how can we have this impact? And we'll talk about that a little bit as we work through the journey. Some of you will be saying, well, obviously there's a delay translating research into practice. We'll talk about that again in a little bit. But the problem for me is we are working in an applied discipline, doing research that for me the purpose is to have a positive impact, and we're seeing things happening in practice that do not match in any way, really, with what we're starting to find in the research. So at this point, this is when I started to get really, really interested in the field and really think about how we could push it forward. There were a few problems I felt with the work we were doing. The first one was about this complexity. So we started to recognize that the field was complex and that there were different things to consider, but the majority of the studies were still focused on quite basic assumptions around parents being pressurizing or parents being supportive. We weren't really unpacking the nuance of parents, what pressure was, what support was, and the different ways it was shown. We weren't really looking at the interactions between the environment. We weren't really, and we probably still aren't, looking at relationships. So everyone writes that we talk about parent-coach relationships, and very few people actually look at the relationship. Or people say we're talking about parent-athlete relationships, and no one's really looking at the relationship. I also don't think that we were appreciative of how different beliefs and attitudes and backgrounds of parents were impacting how they might be involved. We weren't appreciative of how different sporting setups or cultures were impacting on how parents should be involved. And that relates to my second point, which is, for a long time, the biggest issue in this field has been around the participants that we have used. We have used participants from a small number of sports, from a small number of countries, although I have to appreciate I don't read studies that are published in other languages, so there may be work happening that I'm unaware of. We mostly look at two-parent families, middle income, or, even worse, we don't know who we've looked at because nobody publishes that information. So we did a systematic review a little while ago that we didn't ever publish it, but we went through all of the studies. And half the studies don't even tell you what ethnicity the participants are. They don't tell you what the income is. They don't tell you what the parents' background are. So we don't know. So we have information on a very small population or an unidentified one. We also, remembering that I'm talking about 10 years ago, not now, didn't have any evidence-based interventions. So I said that I had an issue about the interaction or what was happening in practice and what was happening in research, and you could argue, well, the sports had nothing to base it on. We hadn't done any evidence-based interventions to address that. But my big issue was that none of the research, I feel, was facilitating actual change. Because whose responsibility is that? Is it our responsibility as practitioners or as researchers to translate our research into practice? Is it the responsibility of academics educating new scholars to make sure that they can translate it into practice? Is it the responsibility of coaches or organizations to read literature that is behind paywalls and impenetrable times for them to impact it? So for me, prior to the kind of current present day, I suppose, these were some of the big issues with the research and the practice that we were encountering. The positive news is that we are in a very different place right now. So coming to the question of are we having a positive impact, you might say yes, because we are now in a place where there is huge amounts of research happening, and this is just a collection of them. We have more exciting methods being used. We have different questions being asked. We have research that is happening in different countries. We have research that is happening in different sports. And we're starting to get some research that is happening in slightly different demographics. And it covers a whole range of topics. So we've now got research that is starting to recognize the impact of youth sport on parents' mental health. And we're finding that it's not necessarily all bad. We're finding that actually the mental health of parents might be more positive as a result of having children involved in youth sport. We're starting to get a little bit more nuance around the parent-coach interaction, considering whether coaches are volunteers or whether coaches are paid. We're starting to recognize this as a transactional relationship that we need to consider. we've really started to unpack some of the interactions that exist between parents and children, thinking about some of the work that Chris and Catherine have published, where they've really looked at the specifics of conversations that have happened in different situations. Some of the work of one of my students has started to really unpack the idea around support and the importance of responsive support, and recognizing that there's not just sort of one type of support. We still have some continuing work happening around what people prefer and what their preferences are from their parents. And for me, the most exciting part is we're starting to consider even more how the culture of sport might be impacting on what's happening for parents. So when we think about the variety and the range of research that's happening, I think the conclusion that we can come to is this is a complex field. We are talking about individuals who are engaged in multiple relationships. Those multiple relationships occur in multiple situations. Those multiple situations occur in multiple environments. And there are all sorts of things that are impacting what's going on. So you might say, well, that complexity is great. Right? We're starting to unpack, we're addressing that issue that I had before. But with capturing complexity, what we've also started to do is overly simplify some of the research. So it's complex when you put all of the different topics together, but when you look at the individual studies in silo, we're still focusing on positive and negative behaviors. We're still focusing on, can we classify this as good parenting and bad parenting in lots of instances. We are still struggling, although we're starting to see some research that is happening in different populations, to expand beyond the dominant two-parent family, to expand beyond the dominant heterosexual family, to expand beyond certain ethnicities and certain sports. So yes, we're starting to get some complexity, but are we truly embracing and recognizing the world and the society that we're working on? And yes, very positively, we've started to see some interventions develop. But I've just said that the research is starting to point to complexity, that the research is starting to recognize the importance of relationships, the importance of the culture, the importance of the environment, and our research-based solutions are to educate parents. We have a complex social interaction happening in multiple environments, and we will fix it with a workshop. We will fix it with a booklet, and we will go, very good, look at us, we've done some applied work, let's crack on. It really annoys me. It really annoys me because we're in a position where we can actually facilitate change, where there are sports organizations who are begging for our input of research, and what are we telling them? Run some workshops. There was a presentation yesterday in golf where the parents talked about all of the stress they experience, all the logistics, all the issues they're encountering, and their solution was, give me a workshop. Why would a workshop fix the systemic issues in the youth sport culture? Why would a workshop mean the fact that youth sport is too expensive for the majority of people to participate, make that better for parents? I am all for workshops. I am all for let's give some more information. But we have got to, if we want to facilitate real change, recognize that there is a lot of work that needs to happen to take the complexity in this really awesome growing body of work to really make a difference. I recognize, and I look around the room, and I know there's some practitioners working in this field who are going beyond the work that is published. I do a lot of work with organizations that will never be published because they are not interested in it being evaluated for research. And there is some good stuff happening in organizations. I appreciate that there will be people who I don't note here because I don't know the work that you're doing, but I want to talk about some of the work that is happening. I've been involved for 5 years with an initiative called Parents in Sport Week. So Parents in Sport Week came about in the UK off the back of complaints about parents' behaviors. It's organized by it's run by an organization called the Child Protection in Sport Unit. Their job is to make sure that kids have safe and enjoyable sporting experiences, and they were getting a lot of complaints about parents. So as an organization, their solution was, let's have a campaign around parents, but it was going to be entirely based on all of the things parents did wrong. So let's tell them, these are all of the things that you shouldn't do these instead. So exactly like we were talking about 10, 15, 20 years ago with codes of conduct and messages around how it's parents' fault and we need to do better. Fortunately, over the last 5 years, we've really shifted that message to, you're doing a great job as a parent. Now, as a club and an organization, what do you need to do to support them to make it better? There's some other initiatives, some of the work that Chris has been doing with the LTA, some of the work that we've done through a European project, some of the work that's coming out from Canada, which is education-based, but is based within a contextual and a cultural understanding of the sport that's happening. But there's some really good work happening in New Zealand. And I have had the privilege of being involved with some of the work in New Zealand for a couple of years. And do you know why there's really good work happening in New Zealand? Because they've said the youth sports system is wrong. Let's change the focus of sport. And as a result of trying to change the focus of sport, they've had to consider and change the environment. They've had to consider how parents react to and respond to the environment that they're in. And they've had to do a piece of work with athletes, parents, and coaches to try and change perceptions of the youth sports environment. And there's other work that's sort of happening within that organization and within those settings. So to answer my question, for me, do I think we're really improving the youth sport experience of children and parents? Not in the slightest. I think we are publishing a lot of really interesting research. I think we are getting a really nice appreciation in our siloed thinking around, these are some good things parents do, these are some of the things that impact on parents' experiences, these are some of the things that might need considering within the research. But are we really having a positive impact on parents and children? I don't know. I don't think we are. If you do think we are, and maybe we are, I'm being a little bit harsh on the field here, do I think we can do more? Absolutely. We need to do more field-based work. We need to do more intervention-based studies. We need to do more with different populations. We need to do more with considering how we communicate to different populations and the methods and the ways in which we are communicating that. We need to think about what we want to do as academics and whether it's our responsibility or someone else's responsibility to translate some of the knowledge that we have into practice. And I know there are some great people who are doing this work, and I'm positive about where the field is going, but I'm also sick of reviewing papers which are not contributing to a positive step forward in this field. And I understand there are pressures to publish, and I understand there are pressures to move things forward, but what I would say, and I think it applies in any field, is let's take a look at the field and say, what do we want this field of work to do, and how does this research contribute to helping it move forward? But I would also say we need to think about the negative impacts that our research may have. And I have something that has stayed with me for a long time, and it's this. We're in a situation right now where there are more and more disclosures and revelations around abuse that happens in sport. I grew up in tennis. I watched parents hit their kids. I watched coaches really lose it at their kids. We've got people who've been in gymnastics. We've got people who've been in swimming who are doing research. We know that the youth sport environment is not always a positive one. By we I mean me, I am a youth sport researcher who wants to have a positive impact on children's and young people's experiences, and we have abuse happening. Well, how have I got here? How does abuse link into the work of parents? These are tweets, and it is easy to find tweets. I don't expect you to necessarily read them. But whenever there is a case of abuse that is raised, you can guarantee someone somewhere will say, where were the parents? How did the parents allow this to happen? How did the parents not step in? How did the parents have conversations after the fact? How do the parents now live with themselves? And then someone tweeted this, and I know there's a typo, it's not my tweet. But this is how I feel. We are blaming the parents before we blame the coaches, in some instances. And when I think back to the field of work, when I think back to the research that's happened and the stimulus for the research around parents, it's almost always underpinned by an idea that parents are a problem that need to be fixed. So where's our responsibility as researchers? Well, when we step out of our discipline in sociology, they have been telling us for a number of years that parents get silenced in the culture of sport. Anyone who has spent time in youth sport cultures knows that parents get silenced. The suggestions of the work that we should do with parents, the suggestions of what solutions to dealing with parents were to silence them, to tell them to be good, to tell them to be quiet, to tell them to respect coaches' authorities, not to interfere, not to question what they were doing. That is what I wrote in some of my first papers, and it's what has been written in papers over and over and over again. And it gets called out on tweets. It gets called out on tweets because we are proposing a good sport parent narrative, and as sport psychology researchers within the field of sport parenting, I think we are contributing to this narrative. And I think we're contributing to the narrative because we are forgetting why we do the work. And we are so desperate to push the field forward from an academic perspective, or we're so desperate to publish our next idea, that we don't think anything of starting a paper with parents are a problem that need to be solved, or coming up with an educational program because parents are a problem that we need to educate. So for me, other people are telling us this, and we are not responding in a way that I think positively is contributing to the work and the field of work that we are doing. And it sits with me personally as a researcher because I didn't think about the potential negative consequences of the research that I might be doing. When I wrote, these are children's preferences for sport, and then someone made it into a do's and don'ts list, it annoyed me they made it into a do's and don'ts list because I hate do's and don'ts lists because it's all parent blaming and it's focused on parents. But I didn't consider that I might be messaging in a way that would negatively impact on parents or negatively impact on the youth sport experience. So to come to the title of my talk, I just want to pose whether in our research we are supporting parents in the way that we think we are, when we are writing papers suggesting this is how they should be involved, when we are writing papers about the interventions that we've done and the education programs that we've put in place. Are we being as supportive and positive and promoting the importance of parents as we think? Or are we silencing them? Are we adding to the narrative that parents should be quiet, that parents shouldn't, that parents shouldn't have to have a conversation with their child about youth sport. When we are selling our research to practitioners, when we are selling our research, to organizations, how do we message it? Do we message it with, we recognize parents are a problem, here's some solutions? Because for me, that's not supporting, that is silencing them. When we go on Twitter, as academics, how many of us, and I don't do it, so I'm guilty of this too, dare to suggest that the narrative that's being portrayed about parents is wrong? And how many of us inadvertently repeat that narrative when there's a comment about how important it is that parents are silent on the sidelines? How many of us are accidentally or without realizing it, actually reaffirming that parents might be a problem? And the big one for me is every time we stand up and we do an intervention that educates parents, or we work with an organization to educate or to improve what parents are doing, are we really standing on the side of the organization and going, it's not you who's a problem, it's them over there? And as soon as we have a conversation that suggests to organizations that you're good, you carry on, have these ridiculous standards and these ridiculous expectations in a youth sports setting, we'll just tell the parents to be better, I think that we're contributing to a situation where we might be silencing them. Now, I am not suggesting that anyone in this room or anyone who is not in this room's research has contributed to abuse in sport. That would be a far stretch even for me. But I am wondering if our research is pushing against it. And I am wondering if our research is really, truly having the impact and making the difference that we want it to make. So what for me is the solution? Well, the first has to be that we have to embrace the complexity of research and practice. We have got loads and loads of people working in this field who are suggesting the importance of the environment, the importance of cultural backgrounds, the importance of individual beliefs. We cannot say that the solution to that is a 6-session workshop that tells you how to cope with stress. And that's a dig at my own work that's currently about to come out. That cannot be the solution if we really want to have an impact positively. Can we stop looking only at the sports psychology literature and at least go into the psychology literature and ideally also look at the sociology literature or the geography literature or whatever other literature has considered the impact of the environment, the impact of culture, and start to maybe collaborate? Start to understand how a representation in one field might be negatively evaluated or considered in another field. Can we be truly transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary researchers? Can we find the gaps that we are currently not finding and do something more exciting and more creative? Can we, as academics, many of whom I know work in applied practice, engage truly in co-production or translational science work? The best work, the only work that I think's had a real impact for me is when I've been hired by an organization to work at the system level. It takes a lot of time. It does not produce, for all the UK academics, any 4-star research. It does produce impact. It doesn't make my life easy. It involves traveling, it involves questioning, it involves communicating in different ways. But it's exciting, and it has a genuine effect on the organization. And in that, my biggest challenge to anyone working in this field, in youth sport, whether it's in parenting or in youth sport at all, is can we take responsibility for challenging organizations and cultures, not individuals? It is safe and it is easy to deliver a 4-session workshop to parents, especially if they're in a football academy and they think their kid will get banned if they don't show up. It's easy. We stand, we deliver, we do a lovely workshop. Great, thank you very much. But to come to my earlier point, are we just reinforcing to the organization that we're very happy with all of their practice that may be questionable? And actually, can we work with those organizations? And that takes time. And we live in a funny world as academics where we don't think that we have time because we want to publish and we want to get out papers and we don't want someone to beat us to our ideas. But what if we committed 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to work with organizations to challenge their culture, to challenge their thinking? And you might get one paper at the end, but you've truly made a difference to the people who are within that setting. And for me, that comes down to recognizing our responsibilities. And I will not stand here and say that everyone has the same responsibility as me. Some of you will be driven by and passionate by advancing theory. I'm not. I'm driven by and passionate about improving the lives of the young people and the adults who are naive enough to let me into their worlds. No, who are kind enough to let me into their worlds. And so for me, that comes with a responsibility, both as an academic and as a practitioner. How do we do that? We need to be more creative. We need to recognize that actually sometimes the best thing is not what's always been done before. We need to be creative in our research, but we need to be creative in our practice. We need to be reflective about what we have done and where we want to go as researchers and as practitioners. And that's hard. That's really hard. As many people know, I've been very nervous about giving this talk because it's required me to reflect on all of the issues I have with my own work. So it's hard to do, but if we really want to make the impact and have a difference in our research and practice, then I think we need to do that. And we need to be responsive. We need to recognize where something's going the wrong way and change quickly. We need to recognize that if someone pushes back, as I'm sure some of you will in the audience in a minute, that we need to know how we're going to respond to those needs and those questions. And we need to be open to other ways of thinking. I said that New Zealand's doing some great work, and I have had the pleasure of interviewing over the last few months people working in organizations. They have not been educated in sports psychology. They have not been educated in the work of the research that we've done about sport parents. They're change managers, and they've recognized there's an issue with the field, and I sit there for an hour or so listening to them going, you are telling me, I have to be open to what you're telling me works. And fundamentally, to conclude, as one of my friends always likes to text me, my ultimate conclusion is we just need to be better. We need to be better researchers, we need to be better practitioners, and we need to be better at reflecting and understanding what it is that we want to achieve. So with that, I will just thank you for your time and thank you for coming on my little rant/journey with me about the research and practice. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of my current and former PhD and master's students who don't all work in this field but challenge my thinking every day. And these for me are the future of where this work can go. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Absolutely amazing talk. And we will be taking questions now. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We have a microphone and somebody will come to you with the microphone. So we have a couple of questions already. I think Sakis was first. So if somebody would like.
Thanks, Camilla. I really liked very much your talk and the integrative perspective that you presented. And I fully agree with you that challenging the culture of the organization is a priority. However, between the organization and the individuals and the parents, we have also the club level. And at this level, and since you also mentioned cross-disciplinary research and interventions, for example, with colleagues in marketing, for example, or in sport marketing, can we sell better the purpose of sport to parents, the purpose of sport to parents, through interventions at club level that are successful in this respect?
So my experience in this field is not enough people are trying to do it, but my experience is that if we target it only at the club level, and the system or the organization is still very focused on outcomes and winning and early success, then whatever the club tries to do might be quite limited. But there are some examples of clubs, I know of some in the UK that have, and I was hearing about one in Norway in Denmark just recently, who've just said, we're gonna take a different approach, and it's working. So I do think that there's value to trying to work with individuals, clubs, definitely. But I think you are always going to run into a barrier of how the clubs have to fit into, if they have to fit into an organizational structure that maybe doesn't have an aligning culture.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Thank you very much for inspirational food for thought and food for action, I hope as well. I would like to ask you if you could reflect on how do you think that the expectations coaches and parents have between each other influence their relationships?
Hugely. And I think, and I actually, on reflection from both of your questions, realized I didn't really talk at that relational sort of in the middle perspective. But I think it's huge. And I think one of the big issues for a long time has been this idea that as a coach, parents are just a hassle. And that narrative of parents being a problem that I think gets purported over and over again really does impact on those relationships. But when you speak to coaches, or the research that I've done with coaches, the majority of them say, well, it's just a few parents, but it affects my thinking about everyone. And so I do think it's changing the narrative, and it's changing, the ideas around parents that's really important. So I think it's huge. I think their perceptions of each other are important. And I think from a parent's perspective, I think unless they've been in sport a lot themselves, they often don't know what a coach can, shouldn't be doing. And we know that, I know this wasn't your question, but in the abuse literature, we know that they blindly accept what coaches do because they're the expert and they should know what they're doing. So, definitely the expectation and the understanding of what the other person should do is critical in that relationship. I would still come back to that we probably need to address that at multiple levels, though. So just speaking to coaches and saying, this is what you can expect from parents, and speaking to parents and saying, this is what you can expect from coaches, I think will have limited impact if we don't recognize that relationship also occurs in a broader environment.
Thank you very much. We have a next question there, please.
Hi.
Hi.
Camilla, hi, it's Shams, by the way. Nice to meet you in person.
You too.
Camilla, you mentioned that researchers and academics to do more in getting out there to impact at the systems level. Also, it is very clear through your presentation that working from at a systems level, working almost in a family systems approach is very important. I wonder too, in that case, whether the collaboration between a researcher and the practitioner who has a very, is practitioner focused as opposed to research focused, there can be more collaboration between two, right? Because what I'm finding and what I'm thinking and feeling about the UK is we seem to carry these hats and live very separate lives when actually there needs to be far more interaction between practitioners and research academics.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I think some of the issue that we have is probably academics like me who like to have a foot in both camps, and we just think we'll do both of it. But I think, we've just done some work with a club where the work we've done has been through the sports psychologist who is embedded in the club, and it's been much more effective because they know the club, they know the system, the people know them, and I think it's a really, really important model. I think the challenge that we have is often what we try to do with research. So we want to come in and test something that we've pre-prepared, put it in place, and and then there becomes anxiety of, well, will the practitioner do it how we want, or how will they engage, which is stupid, right? Like, we're using the wrong methods if we can't engage with those who are really delivering it. And we talked about it just last night, that actually a lot of the reasons, and this isn't specifically in parents, but a lot of the reasons that sports psychology interventions may not work is because a 22-year-old researcher who has no experience of the field thinks that they should go out and deliver an intervention, when you've got people like yourself and practitioners who have 10, 20, 30 years worth of experience in different settings, who could absolutely make that intervention work because you have the contextual and the cultural knowledge of that setting. So I think it's a really, really important piece. I don't know how we do it, because I think, as you said, we're probably going even more this way. And yeah, I know we have in the UK, we have this horrendous term of a pracademic. I don't like it at all. Like, you're just an academic who likes applied stuff. But this space in the middle, it needs filling. And is that a role in itself, or is it actually that collaboration? But I think you're spot on in terms of that being important.
Thank you. So we have two last questions from Rita and then from Chris.
Hi, Camilla. Thank you for that. I was wondering if you could say a few words in respect to the professionalization of coaches, or the lack thereof, and the fact that coaches are volunteers who, if they do 1 hour a week, it'll take them at least 15 years to become an expert coach of youth, versus somebody who trained as a coach of youth?
It's a great question, and in the sense of, are you wondering what we should expect of those coaches, or with regards to their interactions with parents, or just in general? I think I grew up in tennis, so I've not come from a background of volunteer coaches, but the work that we've seen and the work that I know other people are doing in this field, it's really hard to be a volunteer coach, to decide that this is your passion and you're going to give up that time. But I do think that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility, if we're going to be volunteer coaches, to actually maybe commit some time at the beginning to make sure that we are able to do what we're doing. And I'm not saying that you'll in any way reach that necessarily the same space as someone who's gone through a professional sort of training, but I do think there has to be a commitment to something. And actually, I think that if you can work with coaches, volunteer coaches, who are maybe just doing, an hour or so a week, and help them to understand that the early investment in time, so maybe it's how you work with parents, or that investment in upskilling, saves you a whole host of hassle down the line, they tend to buy in. So I think we don't have to just wait for the hours to add up and for them to develop that. I think we can support them early on to understand that actually, yes, it might take a few more hours in those initial period, but it will save you all of that, because it's never an hour. You're dealing with complaints and the solution. So, for me, it's about how do we package it and how do we position, what the benefits of maybe investing in themselves early on, even if they are just volunteering. I don't think that really answered your question, but sorry.
Thank you. And final question, please, Chris.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Camilla, and just excellent keynote. I just want to say it really impacted my thinking around going forward in this particular area as a parenting researcher, but also the biggest impact is how much the framework of your keynote will have impacted other researchers in other areas in terms of their reflection of their impact of their own topic area, which is what an excellent keynote should do. My question is around the challenging organizations challenge. We've both worked within organizations, and I want to ask you to consider at what level of the organizational system do we need to, or have the best opportunity to impact? Because if I think about the LTA, then the LTA system is full of mini systems. So am I impacting at the chief executive, or am I impacting in the competitions department where my work is, or in the coaching department, or in performance support? Because those systems don't talk to each other in some systems. So where would you see our greatest impact going on in terms of impacting an organizational system?
So within organizations, I think the biggest issue that people are trying to address is within those talent pathways. So in my experience in the UK system, it's in the pathway programs. So whoever's leading on the pathway. But actually, the most important piece for me is it's about identifying the individual in the organization who gets it and who's passionate about it, because even if they don't talk, if there's an insider pushing that voice as well, pushing that message as well, that has the biggest impact. So if I think about the work I do with England Rugby, it sits within the talent, the performance pathway, but the reason it works so well is that the head of the performance pathway gets it, and he is challenging, and he will push back, and so it works well. I think when I think about the organizations that are doing really, really nice work within within New Zealand, it's always in that talent pathway space. But the most important bit is that the person who you are collaborating with and working with in the organization wants to see the change too. And if they don't, then it becomes a longer collaboration to get them to the same space of thinking. But in my experience, in all of the organizations I've worked, I've been able to find at least one person who gets it, who wants to challenge the environment, who doesn't like the focus on excessive competition, for instance, and I latch onto them and I push it forward with them.
Thank you very much for all of your questions. I believe there will be plenty more to come because the topic is very interesting. So I suggest you can take all of your questions during the coffee break right now. But now please join me in the round of applause one more time for the amazing keynote. And on behalf of FEPSAC, thank you very much for being here today, Camilla, and for delivering such an amazing speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Is it all right? I got both.